in burglaries and a 5.2% increase in vehicle accidents. Now, the Ombudsman is now urging consumers to revisit their safety measures at home and become more familiar with the fine print of their insurance contracts. Let's talk more about that now with Senior Assistant Ombudsman Peter Nkhuna. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Peter. Maybe just paint a picture of that rise in rejections of claims that you, as the Ombuds Office, have seen.
Good evening, Rofhiwa, and good evening to the viewers. Perhaps let's backtrack a little bit. Just to indicate that our office doesn't quite deal with claims, but complaints, most of which will indeed be related to claims. So what we would be reporting on would be an upward trend that we pick up every time there is a spate of load shedding incidents, and which then leads to more related claims, and subsequently we would also then receive higher numbers of complaints related to power surges.
Now, how do clients of different short-term insurers then protect themselves when it comes to those claims? Because I'm sure in many instances they are valid in terms of what the blackouts have caused, whether it be burglaries or an accident because it was dark and the traffic may have caused some mayhem on the roads.
I think the important thing to always remember with regard to whether or not one would have a valid claim is that it's all a matter of a contractual relationship. Your policy will dictate what the terms and conditions of cover are, including whether or not you enjoy cover for power surge and related losses. And therefore, if one does enjoy that type of cover, one should be able to successfully claim. Of course, there would also be potential limitations, especially now that it is well known that load shedding is here to stay with us. A lot of insurers have found ways to limit liability. Previously, when power interruptions first started, we saw a lot of insurance companies also completely removing that type of cover from their policies. So it really would be a question of whether one does enjoy cover in terms of their policy or not.
Is it an issue also, just based on your engagements and the observations, the fact that the excess that a client would have to pay for a claim on household goods, for example, is completely different to what they'd have to pay for a car accident? And so the claims that are being paid for those instances are much lower, and so there is perhaps a financial pressure on insurers when it comes to processing the level of claims that they've been getting over the last few months or so.
I wouldn't necessarily agree that the excesses are lower. I suspect it probably, again, depends on a policy to policy, because with the incidence of load shedding being as high as it is, insurers are recognizing the fact that it is a higher risk. And what tends to happen when that happens is you would have premiums going up. You would also see an uptick in excesses. And of course, each individual consumer has the option always to dictate what premiums they pay, what excesses apply to their particular policies. So there's a negotiation. You could well find that they are not necessarily as you put it. It is a question of negotiations between the parties and what gets to be agreed upon. And of course, whether the insurer would have the appetite to lower such excesses, because it might just be too risky for the insurer to have low excesses in that regard.
With that thought in mind, if a consumer or a client is not particularly happy with the outcome of the claim, what avenues are they able to take?
Thanks, Rofhiwa. One of the avenues would obviously be the Ombudsman for Short-Term Insurance. This would be a forum that can be approached by consumers that do have policies and want to lodge complaints against their own insurance companies. There could also be instances where people are not insured and perhaps institutions like Eskom and whoever else is responsible for these power cuts could potentially be approached with a view to claiming from them. Of course, you also have courts where if one's dispute with their insurance company is not resolved, one can approach the courts for some sort of relief. So the options are there. I think speak to your legal advisor, speak to your insurance broker, speak to the ombudsman, and you should be able to get guidance in terms of what sort of relief you could obtain and where to obtain such relief.
We have run out of time, but I have to ask you this final question. The fact that you mentioned a little bit earlier is that some short-term insurance have removed that clause around covering their clients when it's related to power cuts. Does that not concern you as the Office of the Ombudsman for Short-Term Insurance? And is there any kind of engagement you'd be willing to have with insurance? Because consumers can't afford, in many instances, to buy new appliances or televisions or get their cars fixed at their own accord without that assistance?
Well, it's something that I am not so sure would be the turf of the ombudsman, in that first and foremost, one has to understand that there are different products out there. So if your particular insurance provider doesn't have or doesn't offer that sort of cover, you can shop around and find a provider that could offer it, and then you buy that product because that would probably be a product that better suits you. In a case where we would be involved, I think by implication we would be saying that people don't have the right to choose what sort of business they go into and who they go into those businesses with, and that doesn't sound very fair. So a consumer ought to be able to find who is a suitable business partner with whom they can obtain insurance cover. And if the particular one is not suitable, there is always the next one to consider and see if the product will better suit one's needs.
But given the current times, it would seem that that pool of choice is getting smaller and smaller, just given the increase in claims and, of course, the struggles of Eskom that continue to increase or escalate. But thank you very much for your times. That is Senior Assistant Ombudsman Peter Nkhuna there, just joining us to speak about the increase in complaints of rejected insurance claims when it comes to those related to the power cuts that have taken place recently.